east of the land too.
It's been a pretty heavy news day as reflected on the panel today, so we'll end probably with this. Please discuss what actual use to society is being informed by the so-called news. Please consider how the news seldom represents anything uplifting, even though blind Freddie can see that the world is mostly a magnificent place. Why do media bring this misery into our experience every hour on the hour, often interrupting and dismissing the most wonderful, interesting guests? Although not in the case of the panel. As a teacher, I refuse to teach and or encourage so-called current affairs and news, because I believe that society operates in a far better way when we focus on things that are uplifting and life-affirming. And the emailer wants her name withheld because she's a teacher.
Right.
Pollyanna.
Is the 24-hour news cycle bringing us down?
Yes. I'd like to out loud something on this, Jim, though. If I can bring it to your attention and circle the wagons. I've come up with a word for it. It's called hypocrophilia.
Yes.
Which is the love of hypocrisy, which you love to see in a lot of other people. So I thought it was a good term to have. And there are a lot of hypocriphiliacs in America, for example, who love to watch Trump do things that they hate. And I think their theme should be first do some harm. Is it like a hypocritic oath?
First do some harm.
First do some harm.
I'm not really following this.
Or in Google's case, a bit of harm.
Well, it's just that I think that we love to be offended by stuff all the time, and the news is one of those things that we often feel aggrieved by, and in fact we make a show about it here in the afternoon between 3:45 and 5 o'clock.
So it entertains us. Well,
it entertains us. We enjoy it, but also there's an element of joy that comes from others' discomfort.
Right.
Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude.
I think you have to select your news sources with great care, because some of them really do wear you down, and I think that you can have periods in your life where you switch off. Like I didn't see any television recently for about 4 or 5 weeks. That was really pretty refreshing. But
I feel like that about Alex Jones.
But every day read a newspaper.
Right.
Which I don't do here because I just read it on my phone. So I actually held a newspaper in my hand. I hope this teacher is teaching more sort of science and social science, for example.
Or phys ed.
Yes, or phys ed, or something that doesn't require these young people to be aware of what is going on in the world, because I think it is actually really important that they have some grip on what's happening. It is the world they're going to inherit.
Is the grip that we've got on what's happening, though, skewed? I mean,
it's always skewed. Look, news is selected for presentation to you, isn't it?
It is now, and it is more and more opinion-based, isn't it?
But it always has been.
Well,
I mean, it's been the roles of the editor to decide this is important, we'll run this, we're not going to run this.
But what happened to the impartiality of the 60s and 70s when the press was you had to present cogent argument for both sides and let the person make up their mind? That's long gone.
Well, that's why I say you have to select where you get your news. I mean, I think if you, for example, always watch Fox News, you're going to have a particular view of the world. And I think for people who don't like Fox News, you should watch that too sometimes, because you need to know what other people are thinking and absorbing by way of news.
And just how much you can hate Sean Hannity.
Yeah.
Nice to hear your thoughts today on an action-packed hour. Peter Elliott's been with us. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
And Claire Delore, thank you for your company, Claire.
You're welcome.
That's us, everybody. We're back tomorrow, and Checkpoint is along very shortly.
Tōtu mai rai hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, it's a deal. Nurses vote to accept the DHB's fifth offer, ending a year of pay negotiations. Does New Zealand have a two-tier health system? Survival of the richest. A leading oncologist says increasingly yes. Boat tickets sold to the highest bidder. Tensions rise on the Gili Islands in Indonesia following the earthquakes. Massey University cancels a speaking engagement by Don Brash and ignites a free speech firestorm. Joseph Parker speaks about his future for the first time since his loss to Dillian White. Auckland Council investigates the circumstances of a cattle attack in the South Auckland Park at the weekend, and a whale stranded on a Northland beach for 2 days is euthanized. All of that and more coming up after Katrina with the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. A Wellington nurse says the pay deal agreed today will deliver her top priority of better staffing. Hospital nurses have voted to back the latest deal offered by district health boards after a year of talks and a national 24-hour strike by nurses last month. The deal includes pay rises between 12.5% and 16% and strengthens commitments to safe staffing levels. Mel Anderson, who works in paediatric care at Wellington Hospital, says it will mean she no longer has to spend hours looking for a nurse to fill a shift.
I'm hoping that I'm not so busy that I can't spend 20 minutes sitting talking to a family. I'm hoping that with this extra staff I can educate families so they don't have to come back into hospital. That's what I'm hoping, that it will mean I can spend time with my patients and do the job that I love to do.
Wellington paediatric nurse Mel Anderson. The Post-Primary Teachers Association has begun secondary teachers' pay talks by calling for extra pay for teachers in areas with high housing costs. High house prices and rentals have been blamed for a teacher shortage in Auckland, and the union is seeking an allowance for teachers facing rents 10% higher than the national median. The claim also includes a 15% pay rise and more non-teaching hours. It says the claim will help attract and retain more teachers. Primary school teachers began their pay talks in May and are currently in mediation with the Education Ministry ahead of a strike scheduled for next week. And the Defence Minister has announced that from next year all Defence Force employees will be paid at least the living wage. The living wage is calculated to be $20.55 an hour, $4 more than the official minimum wage. Mr Mark told Parliament currently 8% of Defence Force civilians are paid below that rate.
After this year's remuneration package, which will come into effect in September and be backdated to July, this figure will drop down to 6%. Following the 2019 package, all civilians will be on at least $20.55 per hour.
The Defence Minister, Ron Mark. Massey students say they've been cut out of a controversial decision to ban Don Brash from speaking at the university's Palmerston North campus. Massey has cancelled an invitation to the former National Party leader to speak at a Politics Society event over fears it could spark violence. The Vice-Chancellor, Jan Thomas, says the decision was made in light of a heightened sensitivity about the visit of two right-wing Canadian speakers to New Zealand. However, the president of Massey's Student Association, Ben Schmidt, says students are disappointed they weren't consulted before the decision was made.
We proudly support Te Waitangi Bicultural Society. That's a great thing. And we don't agree with a lot of Don Brash's quite simply racist views often. But it's important to remember that students and their clubs, they should be able to engage in discussion and debate. As long as it's respectful, as long as it's within the Human Rights Act, freedom of expression, that is really important, a part of university.
Ben Schmidt of Massey's Student Association. And Don Brash says he doesn't know why he's been banned from speaking at Massey University, but he says the Vice-Chancellor claimed there was a threat of guns being brought onto the campus.
It's not quite clear why I was banned. I mean, the Vice-Chancellor said it was on security grounds, but she said on another radio station just an hour ago that, in fact, she hadn't consulted the campus security people. She made the judgment on her own behalf.
Don Brash says he was invited several months ago to take part in a series of speeches by political leaders about what he was doing when he was party leader. Indonesian rescue workers are combing through rubble on the tourist island of Lombok in their search for survivors of yesterday's 6.9 magnitude earthquake. The death toll stands at 98 and up to 20,000 people are thought to have been displaced. Ridwan Sobri from the Indonesian Red Cross says thousands are sleeping outside in makeshift shelters.
There is a lot of children and elderly people also. They stay just along the road because, they are still worried and would not go back home.
Ridwan Sobri. Thousands of tourists have also been evacuated from Lombok and the nearby Gili Islands. Northland locals say it's heartbreaking that the humpback whale, stranded since Sunday, has had to be put down. The female whale was found on Rapiro Beach near Dargaville on Sunday with her calf, which died yesterday. The Department of Conservation, local iwi and animal groups decided this morning to put down the adult whale after attempts to refloat her failed. A local resident, Lisa Cotterill, who was at the beach before the whale was killed, says the situation is tragic.
It's quite heartbreaking, really. She looks very stranded and looks like she's probably suffering now, so I think the decision is probably the best for her at this time. It looks like there's nothing more they can do.
Lisa Cotterill. Doc won't say exactly how the whale was killed, saying only that a special gun was used. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport. The New Zealand boxer Joseph Parker says he has no plans to cut ties with his long-time trainer Kevin Barry. After consecutive losses, pundits have questioned whether Barry should remain in the corner of the former WBO world champion. But Parker says it's not a question that needs asking.
If I wasn't happy and if I wasn't continuing to learn in training, and if I wasn't progressing as a fighter, then I'll look at changing, but I'm progressing and getting better all the time, which I think, and I'm happy.
Joseph Parker. New Zealand's Sam Meach isn't fazed by his dip in form as he chases glory in the laser class at the Sailing World Championships in Denmark. Meach is in first place with 5 races remaining, but he's coming off his worst result in the regatta, a 13th and 4th place finish in tough, gusty conditions in yesterday's 2 races. Today was a rest day before they crack back into it tomorrow morning, and Meach is happy with how he's going despite recent blips.
I still think I'm sailing well, and I think it's just difficult conditions, and hopefully everyone's going to have good days and bad days, and hopefully the next couple of days are good for me.
Sam Meach. That's the news.
A crisis in business confidence?
There are a number of things out of our control at an international level. At a government level, what we're trying to do is address the other concerns business have raised that domestically they want us to look into.
Confident of a pay rise?
We're seeking a correction so that teaching is once again a desirable profession.
OK, so you're not clearly going for a pay cut though, are you? You're going for a pay rise?
Yeah, absolutely.
No confidence in buses?
Connections sometimes don't even show up, so I've been left stranded in Newtown in the dark.
Always on time, morning report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, how so-called amazing dragon fossils found in China are rewriting the history of the world's largest dinosaurs. And after 10, UK actor Naveen Chowdhury on his new TV thriller and breaking the mould of the portrayal of minorities on screen. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Peninsula and the central high country. Fine today, isolated showers developing tomorrow morning, then turning to widespread rain by evening with some heavy falls, possibly thundery in Taranaki and Waitomo. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Occasional rain clearing Gisborne and Hawke's Bay by this evening, but returning tomorrow night. A few heavy falls in Bay of Plenty late tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa. Fine today, a few showers developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain in the evening. Northerly gales in exposed places tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Bulla through to Fiordland. Scattered showers turning to widespread rain south of Bulla this afternoon and evening, and elsewhere tomorrow. Some heavy and possibly thundery falls also. Northerlies rising to gale in exposed places. Canterbury to Southland, fine at first. Patchy light rain developing late this afternoon or evening, and the Chatham Islands showers. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. We appreciate the privilege of your company. This is not the end, it's just the beginning. The words of nurses today as the union announced its 30,000 members have voted to endorse the 5th pay offer from DHBs, removing the threat of further strike action hanging over the country's hospitals. 500 more hospital nurses agreed to as part of the deal are already starting to be hired. But as our health correspondent Karen Brown reports, not everyone is seeing it as a victory.
Nurses voted by a significant majority to accept the latest pay deal from district health boards. Their union's relief was palpable, with Kai Whakahaere Keri Nuku saying nurses' voices have been heard.
The issues have been highlighted, and your calls for a health system that ensures quality healthcare services, that recognises the health workforce and the standard of care that must be delivered to our public health services and patients has been heard.
The deal includes pay rises for hospital nurses of between 12.5% and 16% over 2 years and strengthens commitments to safe staffing levels, a big sticking point for many. A nurse working in paediatric care at Wellington Hospital, Mel Anderson, appeared to fight back tears when she described how she's hoping she will no longer have to spend hours working out how to staff the next shift.
I'm hoping that I'm not so busy that I can't spend 20 minutes sitting talking to a family. I'm hoping that with this extra staff I can educate families so they don't have to come back into hospital. That's what I'm hoping, that it will mean I can spend time with my patients and do the job that I love to do.
Mel Anderson says her priority throughout the year of pay talks and the day-long strike last month was a pressing need for improved or safe staffing.
The money is great. I need money to eat and get to work with petrol, but the safe staffing part for me was the most important.
A Christchurch nurse working in ophthalmology, Luke Wingram, said some eye patients are facing delayed care, and the nursing boost is an important sign of a commitment to improve services.
We're seeing loss to follow-up and lost patients and delayed follow-up, and this is just part of an overall need to upscale the health sector to meet the needs of the public, and to keep and educate and retain nurses is just basic.
But one emergency department nurse who asked to be identified as Julia says she cried when she awoke to the news this morning after a night shift.
We've had another horrendously busy week. It's the middle of winter and we're just so understaffed. There's just not enough of us, and it's just so disappointing to wake up and see that we've accepted an offer that was really no better than it was a couple of offers ago.
Julia believes nurses have been cornered into agreeing to the latest offer, but she doubts whether the 500 promised extra staff will eventuate.
I guarantee you if you ring me in a month, we won't have any more nurses, or 2 months' time, and it's not enough.
The leader of a breakaway nurses group on Facebook, Danny Wilkinson, is also unhappy.
We told them categorically the last 2 times we were presented the same offer that we didn't want it. So the fact that they've represented the same offer again for a third time, that just really shows they're not listening.
A spokesperson for the DHBs, Jim Green, says they've already begun recruiting the extra 500 nurses.
Nursing in this country has a lot to offer, and I know that nurses do gain experience elsewhere, and we are the benefactors of that as they bring that back, and we're looking forward to seeing them back and enjoying our team and imparting their knowledge.
The unions ratified the deal, which must now be signed by each of the 20 DHBs. Pay rises will be implemented progressively over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Mo te hotaka o te ahi, ko Karen Brownaho.
The Medical Director of the Cancer Society of New Zealand has called the way some of his patients can afford better cancer drugs than others survival of the richest. And Dr. Chris Jackson says he sees variations of it every day that he treats people. His comments come as oncologists throughout the country call for more of the new cancer treatments to receive PHARMAC funding. And they come on the eve of a dinner at Parliament attended tomorrow night by the Minister of Health, key health officials, oncologists and Medicines New Zealand, effectively a form of industry lobby group. Yes, as the nurses vote to settle their pay claim, another battleground in health is beginning to pump up the volume. In the background, of course, pharmaceutical companies whose business is selling drugs. But Dr. Chris Jackson says rich people can buy the drugs anyway, whether PHARMAC funds them or not. And this is increasingly what he's seeing them doing. We begin this report with a question. Dr. Jackson, are you seeing a two-tier health system? Do you have some patients who can afford to spend money on drugs privately and others who can't and therefore aren't getting the same drugs?
Absolutely. We have a two-tier health system and it is very much becoming survival of the richest.
That's the Medical Director of the Cancer Society, oncologist Chris Jackson. Survival of the richest, cancer drugs that PHARMAC don't fund but can be bought if you can afford them, and some patients can't and some can.
And people know about these, they come along, they ask about them, and if they've got enough financial resources, they can access them. So we very much do have a two-tier health system.
And you are dealing with patients who don't have the financial resources to access these drugs?
Yeah, I have tough conversations with people every day.
Every day. And the impact of that?
It's so depressing to talk to people because they're so despondent.
That's Dr. John Zalkberg, Professor of Cancer Research at Melbourne's Monash University and co-chair of Australia's National Oncology Alliance, who's currently in the country for meetings with PHARMAC, the Health Select Committee and the Health Minister. After speaking to oncologists throughout New Zealand, he says they are increasingly despondent about the drugs that exist, but they can't use, at least not in the public system.
And remember, wealthy people get these drugs. We're not talking about the wealthy. Wealthy get them. So we're talking about the average person, the ordinary person in the street who doesn't get them. So they're despondent because they can't provide the right treatments.
And so, like Dr. Jackson, John Zelkberg argues there is a two-tier health system in New Zealand, what Chris Jackson called the survival of the richest. And John Zelkberg says New Zealand is already operating a tier down from Australia.
If you take a disease like lung cancer, which is the commonest cause of cancer death in New Zealand, there are 5 modern new therapies that are available in Australia and the rest of the world that are not available in New Zealand.
The issue in part, of course, is cost. PHARMAC, like the rest of the health system, has finite resources. But John Zelkberg, who has been brought here by Medicines New Zealand, an industry association in whose interests it clearly is for PHARMAC to spend more on drugs, but who's adamant it's patients he's lobbying for, not pharmaceutical companies, claims New Zealand isn't just slipping behind Australia with drug availability. Take, for example, a drug called crizotinib.
Crizotinib works in a very rare subtype of lung cancer, something like 5%, so a very small population. It's available in over 50 countries around the world. There's probably 100 patients in New Zealand that would benefit. If they received it, the improvements in survival and progression-free survival, the improvements are 50%.
So that's a very high efficacy, isn't it?
It's a very powerful drug, and there are now better drugs on the market that have even replaced that.
How much does it cost, roughly?
I have no idea, but if I had to say, I would say in the range, somewhere between 50 and 100. I don't know, some number.
And this is the PHARMAC Balancing Act, isn't it? We want the most for the most with a finite amount of money.
Correct. So the drug's expensive, and I think the problem of drug costs is enormous, and the world is grappling with this, not just New Zealand, not just Australia. But much poorer countries than New Zealand afford this drug for their patients.
This language is by now familiar to everyone who follows debates around PHARMAC and drug funding in New Zealand. And it is strikingly similar to what was being said about drugs like Keytruda 2 and 3 years ago.
So Mother's Day 2015, I ended up in hospital. No idea what was wrong with me. And I certainly didn't expect that a week or so later they'd tell me that I was terminally ill and that there was no treatment available. Stage 4 melanoma.
That's Lisa Renwick, who was told she was dying and offered palliative care.
I went on to morphine fairly quickly, and it was only because I'm married to a pushy man that he pushed and pushed and pushed for access to a private clinic, and then he paid for the drugs that saved my life.
Paid for the drugs that saved my life. That's the key phrase. Lisa Renwick had found herself part of the two-tier health system. Firstly, Lisa and her husband had the confidence to explore options and lobby for access. And secondly, they were able to find the money to pay for it.
I mean, you think you're poor. Maybe you come from a background where you're not confident to hold your own with doctors. How do you find out about what drugs are available? And then when you do find out, how do you pay for them?
If Lisa and her story sound familiar, that's because she's been on Checkpoint before, more than once. Her experience, she was given weeks or months to live in May 2015, funded Keytruda herself, and is alive and well over 3 years on, led her to vocally lobby for the drug to be publicly funded for melanoma treatment. In August of 2016, PHARMAC announced it would be, and it has been since the following month. It was a personal success story with a profound, wider impact. But Keytruda already had proven efficacy to the extent it was publicly funded in Australia and the UK. And Lisa Renwick says what she now believes is that PHARMAC's model compels it to move problematically slowly.
Well, I feel quite sorry for PHARMAC, actually, because they're caught between a rock and a hard place. I mean, the PHARMAC model works really well when there's an alternative. I mean, if you have a new headache medication, they have the time to negotiate over years because there's already headache medication. But when something like this comes in, some new immunotherapy drug that saves people's lives where there was no option previously, that slowness of the PHARMAC model, it doesn't work because the cost is too great, because every day people die waiting and waiting and waiting because they trust the health system to step in, and the health system lets them down.
Dr. Chris Jackson, oncologist and medical director of the Cancer Society. Is PHARMAC keeping up with new cancer treatment?
No. PHARMAC is a model which has delivered very good value for New Zealanders for many years. It's been around 25 years now, but its model is designed to get us the best possible access to drugs at the cheapest possible price. Now, the flip side of that is that means that we don't have access to the latest and most expensive new drugs by virtue of the model that we have. And we know that PHARMAC takes on average 3 years to review an application for a brand new cancer drug, and that means that Kiwis are missing out. And other countries like Australia and like Canada and like the UK do manage to have a system that can facilitate a mix whereby they get good prices for their cheaper drugs, perhaps not as cheap as PHARMAC, but they can get access to these slightly newer, more expensive drugs. So we've got access to all of the cheap chemo drugs that we need, but we've got relatively slow access to these new, novel, high-cost drugs.
And this is the message being taken to Wellington tomorrow. Like the nurses' pay round, oncologists asking for better drugs to treat cancer with will have public opinion on their side. Although with Big Pharma and the huge prices attached to many of these new drugs, the beneficiaries of more spending, there are complexities here beyond the black and white. John Zeltberg says the number one priority should be obvious.
I'm worried about the patient. I think government has a responsibility to worry about the patient, and the patients are missing out.
It's so complex when lives are at stake. What's commercial lobbying? What's public interest? What's in the best interests of individual patients? And are those things always mutually exclusive? PHARMAC wasn't available this afternoon, but we do hope to talk to them in the coming days. And we hope to speak to the Minister once the meetings in Wellington have all been held. But this afternoon, David Clark had an initial response to John Zeltberg's claims about the performance of our drug buying agency, PHARMAC.
I will respectfully disagree with him. He is someone who represents the interests of Big Pharma, and he's also an expert on these drugs, so he has a particular point of view. I listen to experts from across the medical spectrum, and generally they say to me the PHARMAC model is a very good model, it's a robust model, and it means more New Zealanders get access to more drugs than would otherwise be the case.
David Clark. Now, PHARMAC, as we said in that package, was unavailable for an interview at short notice, but in a statement told us it is, quote, assessing and progressing a large number of funding proposals. The relative priority of an application is determined by a number of factors, including clinical advice, the relative health benefits, the amount of funding available, the success of negotiations with the suppliers and/or new clinical data, and the mix of other funding applications being considered at any one time. That is the statement from PHARMAC. We would love your feedback on getting this balancing act right. Do text us 2101 or email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we would love to hear from you if you have had the experience of wanting drugs that haven't been publicly funded and or going and getting those drugs in private. It's 23 minutes past 5 to Indonesia now, where tensions are rising as hundreds of tourists remain stranded following the weekend's 6.9 magnitude quake on the island of Lombok. At least 98 people have been killed, 230 injured, and up to 13,000 homes damaged, forcing thousands of tourists to join those sleeping outside under tarpaulins as they wait to be evacuated from Lombok and the nearby Gili Islands. British tourist Jack Clarkson and his girlfriend are on the island of Gili Trawangan. When we spoke to him yesterday, he was patiently waiting to be rescued, but 24 hours on, with food and water fast running out, Jake told our producer Bridget Burke his patience is wearing thin. He said Indonesian tourist operators were now selling boat tickets to the highest bidder, and the situation is a joke.
No one really seems to know what is going on. There was 2 boats that came about 20 minutes ago, and they were charging extortionate rates for a ticket, when I presume this was a rescue operation, not a money-making scheme, which it seems to be. We've heard another story of another boat come in at around 12:30, and it seems like everybody here is kind of getting sick and tired of there being no form of authority. So we're going to organise chairs and tables to form some sort of queue, so there's going to be some sort of organisation to say, because no one seems to be taking control of it. There's a very scarce amount of locals around at the moment. I'm literally looking around now. and I can't see a single Indonesian, or 1, 2, 3 Indonesians in a group of, I'm guessing, around 200 to 300 people still stuck here.
Are you on the beach right now?
Yeah.
Have you seen anybody in uniform at all?
No.
Regarding your water supply, what quantity of water do you have left?
We have about 2 bottles of water left, but I believe there is some scattered around the island left. People seem to have water, but I'll only assume that that's going to last another day or 2.
Can you tell me what the temperatures are like there at the moment?
It's clear blue sky. Right now it's upwards of about 30 degrees. I just feel like there's got to be some sort of figure here letting us know what the situation is. There's hundreds of people on their phone to different companies hearing different stories. We've got to hear what is actually going on. This was a natural disaster. This wasn't boats just suddenly stopped running because, bad weather or bad seas. This was a natural disaster. And there's been no form of support. There's been no form of clarity. There's been nobody to go to for a situation update. It's all just figure it out for yourself. And it's a joke. It's not the way things should run in a country that relies heavily on tourism. It's a country that is a beautiful place to go to, but the infrastructure in place when things like this happen is just not up to scratch. It's not going well. I used to sell holidays to Indonesia for a living, and I was passionate about this region, and to an extent I still am, but after this, it makes me wonder, why would you send somebody to this region when something like this would happen? And there's no support behind it. There's no figure to go to for some form of information. It's just highly, highly frustrating, and it's just confusing as well, because, as I said, there's just hundreds of different people hearing hundreds of different things that just contradict each other. So no one knows really what's going on. We've heard situations in Lombok that the roads they're impassable. We've heard that they are. We've heard the Lombok airport is closed. We've heard that it isn't. And if it is, there's a 15-hour queue. There is boats to Lombok, but there's can you get accommodation when you get there? What do you do once you're in Lombok? Do you get the slow boat? Do you get a fast boat? How can we get off the Gili Islands? Where do we go to next? There's just no clarity, and there's no one to go to, and it's just so frustrating that I'm just beginning to question why I even came here.
What do you want most right now? What do you need right now?
I want to get off this island. I want to go back to Bali, relax with my girlfriend, enjoy the rest of our trip. And I want somebody to come along and say, okay, everybody, there's a boat coming at 1 o'clock. Can you all please form an orderly line? Women, children and families first, and then everybody else. There isn't that. It's when the boat came and they were selling tickets, it was just a woman on a table and people hoarding round her. And families rushing up saying, look, I've got a family, there's a family of 8 people, we've got young children, we've got a sick child. But people were there just so desperate to get off that they were just flinging money. I said, I had the money in my hand and I had 2 tickets. She was okay. And then somebody goes, no, I'll give you 1.5 million rupiah. And I got outbidded, and they gave it to her. It wasn't a rescue operation. It was a money-making scheme that they've just done. And it's a joke. It's an absolute joke.
British tourist Jack Clarkson from the island of Gili Trawangan speaking to our producer Bridget Burke. 5:29, just before the headlines. Massey University's decision to cancel a speaking engagement by former National Party leader Don Brash has ignited a firestorm about free speech. Dr Brash was due to speak in a students' politics club in Palmerston North tomorrow, but the university says it's scrapped the booking due to concerns over hate speech and violence from protesters. A decision, Don Brash says, is a threat to free speech everywhere. Jill Bonnet reports.
Free speech has been in the spotlight with last week's visit of far-right speakers Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux, who ended up being unable to host a public event because they couldn't get a venue. Now Massey University Vice-Chancellor Jan Thomas says following protests for and against the Canadians in Auckland, the university had to safeguard the safety and well-being of its students. She also says the views expressed by members of Hobson's Pledge, the anti-separatist lobby group led by Dr Brash, come dangerously close to hate speech. Don Brash says he's appalled by her statement.
That's an absolutely outrageous statement. When you argue for equal political rights for everybody, irrespective of ethnicity, to say that is hate speech is absolutely Orwellian nonsense.
The Free Speech Coalition says hecklers and enemies of free speech have been emboldened by Auckland Council's decision to ban Ms Southern and Mr Molyneux from its venues. The ACT leader, David Seymour, says veiled threats from a left-wing thug prompted Massey University's decision.
Taxpayers fund universities in order that we have places of higher learning and critical reflection. It's a dereliction of duty to block the free exchange of ideas due to threats of violence.
David Seymour says the Vice-Chancellor, Jan Thomas, should resign for cancelling the invitation from the university's Politics Society. Professor Thomas says she supports free speech on campus, but they became aware of social media posts suggesting the event could lead to violence.
The Student Association had contacted us to say they had concerns that they may not be able to fulfil their obligation around security and that they had concerns over security for the event. We then looked at that and decided that actually the concern around safety for staff, students, community members who come on campus was sufficiently worrying.
The president of the University's Student Association, Ben Schmidt, says students are disappointed they weren't consulted before the decision was made.
We proudly support Traditional Waitangi Bicultural Society. That's a great thing. And we don't agree with a lot of Don Brash's quite simply racist views often. But it's important to remember that students and their clubs, they should be able to engage in discussion debate. As long as it's respectful, as long as it's within the Human Rights Act, freedom of expression, that is really important, a part of university.
Don Brash says the decision backs up his free speech concerns over Auckland Council's decision.
It's a worrying fact. I mean, if people can shut down people whose views they don't like by threatening violence, we've come to a very sad state.
Don Brash says he may still go to Palmerston North if a venue can be found. He's due to speak at Auckland University on Thursday, but now fears that too might be cancelled. For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Coming up, Joseph Parker, the boxer, at a crossroads. The 26-year-old talks about his future for the first time since his loss to Dillian White. Judith Collins proves to be a headache for her party leader, refusing to apologise or back down over spreading a fake news story on Twitter. A whale stranded on a Northland beach for 2 days is euthanized. Nona has business news next. We'd love your feedback, by the way, 2101. But before any of that stuff, here's KB with the headlines.
Nurses are looking forward to better staffing with the pay deal agreed today. After a year of talks and industrial action, the DHBs and hospital nurses say their agreement has now been settled. A nurse who works in paediatric care says she will no longer have to spend hours looking for a nurse to staff a shift. The Secondary Teachers Union is calling for extra pay for teachers in areas with high housing costs. As part of its pay talks, the PPTA is seeking an allowance for teachers facing rents 10% higher than the national median. The claim also includes a 15% pay rise and more non-teaching hours in a bid to attract and retain more teachers. Massey students are disappointed they weren't consulted before the Vice-Chancellor decided to ban Don Brash from speaking on the university's Palmerston North campus. Jan Thomas says the decision was made amid heightened sensitivity about the visit of two right-wing Canadian speakers to New Zealand. The Students' Association president says they proudly support the Treaty of Waitangi and don't agree with Don Brash's often racist views, but engaging in debate is an important part of university. Indonesian rescue workers are combing through rubble on the tourist island of Lombok in their search for survivors of yesterday's 6.9 magnitude earthquake. The death toll stands at 98 and up to 20,000 people are thought to have been displaced. Ridwan Sobri from the Indonesian Red Cross says thousands are sleeping outside in makeshift shelters. An animal behaviour specialist says cattle and members of the public should be separated during calving season. A man was injured on Sunday when he went to help a woman being attacked by cattle in South Auckland's Totara Park. Auckland Council identified a cow being overprotected of her calf yesterday morning, and both were taken to the slaughterhouse. Animal behaviour specialist Elsa Flint says during the season, cows should go into a safe, separated zone. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Which is 25 minutes away. Thanks, Katrina. On the other side of me, Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona.
Hello, John.
I know you were here last night, but it's nice to see you again.
Oh, thank you.
You talk for a sec. I'm going to ask you, Steel and Tube plans to raise just over $80 million from shareholders, and I'm going to drink because I've got a bit of a cough.
Oh, my. Well, yes, that's right. Steel and Tube are going to be raising $81 million from shareholders, and the reason why is that they have an awful lot of debt. So they're going to be using their money to pay that down, and that gives them a fresh start, an opportunity to put the company back on a strong footing because, you know, they have been through quite a lot and the shareholders have certainly paid a price for that. Now, they're going to raise the money through an offer to institutional investors that they're going to hope to raise $21 million that way with shares at $1.15, and then they're going to offer other shareholders $1.05. They can buy these shares for $1.05 to help raise the money. That's a significant discount to what the company last traded at. That was $1.46. So that's a 28% discount. So good deal for the shareholders.
Nona Peltier gave that answer while I was staggering over to the corner of the studio.
I tried not to pay any attention to that.
I wish people could have seen how magnificently calm and professional you were as I was turning the same colour of your jacket.
You look a little bit blue there as your jacket. That's right.
By golly. The business consultancy KPMG says a drop in confidence among New Zealand's top CEOs is reasonable.
That's right.
Why?
Well, now, we've had a lot of surveys, as you know, John.
More surveys than we can say. And they've
mostly been negative. In fact, quite negative. This latest survey is, you know, also negative. Not surprising, but not as bad as you would have thought. So top 50 companies, the CEOs of the leading companies in New Zealand found that 2/3 are less confident about the outlook for the, 2/3 are still confident about the outlook for the economy. 2/3, that's not too bad, but that's not as well as the year before when 3/4 were more confident. Now, the reason why isn't just because of, you know, housing and whatever. It's mostly government policies and global events. So the trade policies of the United States that's causing uncertainty, and Brexit. So there's been a lot of uncertainty around Brexit that we saw there's just been some more stories coming out of the UK. So the governor of their bank, central bank, came out last week and said that there's a chance that the UK may leave the European Union without a deal.
Hard Brexit, baby.
Yeah, hard
Woo!
Brexit,
Bang.
yes. And now their Trade Minister, Liam Fox, has reiterated that. And that caused the pound to fall to an 11th month low against the US dollar. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and it's not all that we're seeing at home. And I guess that's part of what what these surveys are showing us. We've often talked about like construction sector and housing market, but there's a lot of other things going on in the world that's unsettling.
Yeah, gosh, Brexit's fascinating.
So it's not everything we can solve.
By golly. David Cameron must just be, I would think he'd be hiding under his bed, wouldn't he? Does he go out anymore? Has he been seen in public
I haven't
lately?
seen him. Have you?
No,
I haven't bumped into him. Perhaps he's hiding down under somewhere. But anyway.
What happened on the markets today?
Well, our index that fell, that's the top 50 index, fell 0.3%. That's 27 points down to 8,876. That's not a huge drop. The dollar is also trading at 67.3 US cents, 91 Australian, and at 52 pence, and that that's reflected there in our markets too. So, yeah, it'll be an interesting time. I'm expecting more volatility, John.
Thank you very much indeed, Nona Peltier. The senior National Party MP, Judith Collins, is proving a headache for her party leader, refusing to apologise or back down from spreading a fake news story on Twitter. Quite bizarre, the story she spread and the source it was from. Simon Bridges says Ms Collins got it wrong, but he won't reprimand her. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
The tweet came out of the blue yesterday, Judith Collins challenging the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to denounce France for supposedly legalising child sex abuse. She shared a link to a website suggesting the French government was making it easier for paedophiles to escape rape charges. But France has done no such thing. Indeed, it's recently strengthened its penalties in that area.
Well, I share a lot of information on Twitter, and a lot of articles are just I find interesting, and some of them I find quite bizarre, and I still will share them because actually I don't believe in censorship on people's ideas.
The website shared by Ms Collins is riddled with conspiracy theories. YourNewsWire.com hosts articles claiming the pop star Katy Perry is a satanic cannibal and Justin Bieber a reptilian shapeshifter.
I certainly hadn't seen those.
Ms Collins says she'd think twice before posting an article from that website again, but is showing little sign of contrition.
Was it wrong to tweet that link to that story?
Well, I don't know that I would say that.
But her leader, Simon Bridges, will.
It's a wrong source. She got that wrong. In general, members of Parliament, Judith Collins, she accepts, should get that stuff right.
That's about as far as Mr Bridges will go, though, against the MP who stood against him for the leadership. There's no reprimand, no telling off. He won't even tell Ms Collins to delete the tweet, still on display online.
Well, I think there's absolutely no point in doing that. I mean, as you know,
not taking down a fake news tweet.
Once you tweet, it's there for eternity. There's sites that show us that, so I don't think there's any need doing that.
Jacinda Ardern disagrees. She says if it was one of her MPs, she would insist they take the tweet down.
We need politicians to make sure that we maintain a standard, that we don't disseminate misinformation. I think it's really important that people can have some faith in the news and information that we share and that we talk about in the public domain.
Judith Collins says Simon Bridges hasn't discussed her actions with her, but Mr Bridges says he has. He says he raised the matter with her on the phone last night and in person this morning. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Craig McCulloch.
The humpback whale that has been stranded on a Northland beach since Sunday has been euthanized. The female whale washed up with a calf early on Sunday morning. The calf died yesterday and continued rescue attempts to refloat the larger whale failed, forcing the Department of Conservation, local iwi, Project Jonah and other NGOs to make the difficult decision to euthanize her. Jessie Chang reports.
Tears flowed as a group of around 50 people stood close to the dying whale this afternoon to sing and pay their respects. Kirsten Crichton, who lives in Dargaville, says the decision to euthanise the whale is tragic, but she supports it.
Yeah, I was here Sunday as well, and you've seen she was, quite a bit further up the beach and out as well, and now that you've seen the strength and the determination of how far she's got to here, and now you can just see the change. You can see she's weak and tired, and it's heartbreaking to see, really.
Whale specialist Dr Ingrid Visser says as the situation became more desperate, a number of different solutions were explored.
There were some thoughts that we could get a digger in there and help push her. The problem is that they've got very long pectoral fins, and if you try and push them you can dislocate the shoulder as well. And although a whale can survive a dislocated shoulder, when it's compromised already, that may be the tipping point.
She says euthanising the whale was the most humane option.
It is very stressful for them, when they're sitting on the beach and they're not supported by water, they have other complications. It's difficult to breathe, they can get pooling of the blood, stress hormones are involved, so every hour does make a difference.
Dr Ingrid Visser says while it's been difficult to measure the whale in the water, she's at least 12 metres long, putting her at more than 30,000 kilos. Alan Nisbet, the spokesperson for the local iwi Te Roroa, says euthanising the whale is a huge job, but it has to be done. He says the necropsy of the mammal is vital.
The research on the bones, flesh, the ability for it to be researched is of paramount importance. If this is something's happening, and we need to understand this, and we need to understand why.
The iwi says while the whale's life is now over, the mahi or research into its life will continue. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jessie Chang tēnei.
It's coming up to 5:45. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Auckland Council is investigating the circumstances of a cattle attack in a park at the weekend. A man was injured on Sunday when he went to help a woman being attacked by cows in Totara Park. Auckland Councillor Daniel Newman has since raised questions about whether the leaseholder breached his agreement with the council. Katie Scotcher reports.
The farmer who leases the land, Peter Linton, has done so for 19 years.
The most recent agreement with the council was signed at the end of 2015. It states that the licensee can only graze cattle and sheep on the land and not use it for other purposes. All cattle on the property must be dehorned and can be no more than 2 years old. Bulls are also prohibited from the land at any time. Manurewa Papakura Ward councillor Daniel Newman says he has written to council officers to find out if those conditions are being met.
Obviously, there are matters that have occurred here which require an inquiry as to what took place, whether the appropriate conditions were being met, and we need to ensure that we are investigating these matters for the assurance not only of ourselves as the property owner, but on behalf of our constituents.
RNZ understands council staff met this morning to discuss their policies around keeping cattle on public land. Peter Linton declined a recorded interview with RNZ, but said he was not breaching any of the rules set out in the agreement. Mr Linton says he made the decision with the council to send the heifer and her 8-month-old Vila calf to the slaughterhouse after the attack. He said even if the cows weren't killed yesterday, it's likely they would have been next week. People at Tortara Park today were in two minds about the decision.
They should have just punished them and stuck them in a paddock by themselves.
Just taking the cows somewhere away from the public.
Bit harsh that they got killed, but I suppose, what do you choose, human or animal?
A cow will always be protective of its calf.
It was just a mother protecting her baby, just like a human being. If somebody came along to try and touch my child, I would probably attack them too, but are they going to slaughter me and my baby? No.
Sunday's cattle attack occurred during calving season. During that time, cows are typically very protective of their calves and do not like people getting close. Animal behaviour specialist Elsa Flint says during calving season, cattle and the public should be separated.
They should just go into a safe zone, at least have a fence between them and the area that the people run or, frequent. Generally, most of the animals that live in these shared spaces are very used to people, and so at other times of year I wouldn't expect this sort of behaviour because they're used to all sorts of things going past them and around them.
Miss Flint says people would benefit from having signs at the entrance of the park that describe how to act around a cow and what to do if the animals become agitated. An Auckland Council spokeswoman says its development agency, Panuku, managed the lease and it will review the attack, including considering any necessary changes. He tamaki makoto motiho tako o te ahi ko Katie Scott tēnei.
In a few hours, a formal shift in US foreign policy will take effect when it reimposes sanctions on Iran. It's the sharp end of President Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, which Iran agreed to limit its controversial nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. The sanctions will primarily target Iran's financial and automotive sectors. President Trump's top security advisor has urged Iran to take up an offer of talks with the US or suffer more pain from economic sanctions, but Iran's president says Washington needs to first prove it can be trusted. With more on the toing and froing here, here's the BBC's John Sopel.
The demonstrations may be sporadic and they may be geographically widespread, but discontent across Iran with the state of the country's economy is high and could be about to get a whole lot higher still. The US will reimpose sanctions from tomorrow, making life even tougher. So what can be done to avoid this? President Trump's national security advisor was characteristically blunt.
They could take up the president's offer to negotiate with them, to give up their ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs fully and really verifiably, not under the onerous terms of the Iran nuclear deal, which really are not satisfactory, to stop their support for international terrorism, to give up their military activities in the region.
The sanctions are a direct result of America pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, negotiated by the Obama administration along with Britain and other European nations. In return for halting its nuclear program for a decade, the country was promised sanctions relief. President Trump always maintained it gave Iran far too much for too little in return. So today he signed a new packet of measures, warmly welcomed by allies in the region.
I praise President Trump and the American administration for the decision to impose sanctions on Iran. This is an important moment for Israel, for the US, the region and the entire world. It signifies the determination to halt Iran's regional aggression and also its ongoing plans to arm itself with nuclear weapons.
The sanctions will hit Iran's car industry, trade in gold and precious metals, and the ability to purchase US currency in foreign exchange markets. From November 2018, sanctions will be extended, and they'll target Iran's crucial oil industry. But from Tehran today, defiance.
Trump and his government are the ones who have rejected negotiations and have turned their back on diplomacy. What he is doing is against the Iranian nation and against the national interests of Iran. Iran is ready for diplomacy if there's honesty in the process.
On the streets and in the markets, the Iranian economy has been rocked by the sharp decline in the value of the rial against the dollar, sparking social unrest. America says its goal is not regime change, but it's certainly turning the heat up on Iran's rulers.
John Sopel in Washington for the BBC, of course. English cricketer Ben Stokes, the world's most expensive cricket player, has gone on trial in the UK over a fight outside a nightclub in which he's accused of knocking two men unconscious. The alleged assaults, which happened last September, have led to Stokes missing some of his country's biggest matches as he fights the case. Stokes appeared at the Bristol Crown Court alongside former soldier Ryan Hale and emergency services worker Ryan Ali, friends who had not met the cricketer before that night. The BBC sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
Having had to swap cricket field for courtroom, Ben Stokes arrived here this morning for the opening day of his trial. Dressed in a navy suit, the 27-year-old all-rounder sat in the dock alongside two local men he's accused of punching during a fight in the city last year, Ryan Hale and Ryan Ali. All three are accused of a fray, a charge they each deny. The jury was shown mobile phone footage of a late-night brawl outside a Bristol nightclub in September, just hours after Stokes had played for England. Both Hale and Ali were knocked unconscious by the cricketer, leaving Ali with significant injuries, including a broken eye socket. The court was told Stokes lost his control and started to attack with revenge, retaliation or punishment in mind, well beyond the realm of self-defence. Not a trivial moment of unpleasantness, but a sustained episode of significant violence that left onlookers shocked. The prosecution said Stokes insisted he acted in fear for himself and others and believed the force he used was reasonable and entirely justified. However, the jury was told that earlier in the night, having been denied re-entry to the nightclub, Stokes had acted in a provocative way, a bouncer claiming the cricketer insulted him and mocked two openly gay men, flicking a cigarette butt at one of them. Just 2 days ago, Stokes was starring for his country at Edgbaston, his 6 wickets helping England win the opening test against India. But this case has already cost one of world cricket's top talents the team's vice-captaincy and a place on last winter's Ashes tour, for which he was suspended. This evening, Stokes should have been preparing to play in the second test. Instead, he's been ruled out, with the trial expected to last until early next week.
Dan Rowan in Bristol. It's coming up to 7 minutes to 6. A little more than 4 months ago, New Zealand boxer Joseph Parker was a world champion in the sports glamour division. The humble heavyweight from South Auckland had fought 24 times as a professional and had had his hand raised in victory on all 24 occasions. But after 2 consecutive losses, Parker finds himself at a crossroads in his career, with some urging the proud Kiwi Samoan to get out of boxing altogether. Retirement plans are in the pipeline, but as Clay Wilson reports, Joseph Parker isn't done just yet.
Joseph Parker gave everything at the end, but surely White had accumulated enough over the course of it to win and win in style. Well, that shows it's even more disappointing.
Joseph Parker knows his loss to Dillian White 9 days ago in London was a setback, especially since it came just a few months after he suffered his first professional defeat and had to hand over his WBO world title belt to British star Anthony Joshua. Despite back-to-back losses, the 26-year-old is in good health, with millions of dollars in the bank. But although some have suggested to the contrary, Parker is adamant those are not reasons to step away from the sport.
I have a goal, and I know what I want to do in boxing, and I know that a lot of people have their opinions that I should give up and should stop and should do something else and retire, but I think, you know, it's important that if we decide, we have decided to keep fighting, because as a team we know what we can achieve and what we can do in the boxing world.
This doesn't mean Parker, now a father of two, doesn't have a plan in place to hang up the gloves. He says having two daughters is both the reason he wants to keep fighting and the reason he fully intends to retire before he suffers any significant long-term damage.
For me, having two children, I still love what I do, and I know that I have a goal to stop at 30. And the reason why I'm stopping at 30 is because I think that's a great time to stop and spend a lot of time with family, but as long as they're already set up for life, you've got to set them up for life and give them a good future and help them. And so I feel like I still have a lot to give in the boxing world, but I know when to stop.
It's a feeling that has only been reinforced after his loss to White. Parker yesterday went for a precautionary MRI scan as a result of a nasty head clash in the second round of the bout. But after he hit the rural roads for a run near his new home south of Auckland this morning, his road back to the top is already underway. Promoter David Higgins says, at Parker's request, the conversations concerning his return to the ring have begun in earnest.
The goal remains the same, to try and unify the heavyweight division, and that's his decision. I'd never push anyone to box if they didn't want to, but Joseph is still hungry, and it's his career and his body and his life, so he wants to go forward. And so we're targeting hopefully the end of the year for a comeback.
It's a comeback that Parker has made clear will include his longtime trainer Kevin Barry. After consecutive losses, some pundits have questioned whether Barry should remain in Parker's corner. As far as the fighter himself is concerned though, it's not a question that needs asking.
If I wasn't happy and if I wasn't continuing to learn in training, and if I wasn't progressing as a fighter, then I'll look at changing, but I'm progressing and getting better all the time, which I think, and I'm happy.
Which opponent Parker and Barry will be preparing for remains to be seen. White, Joshua, American champion Deontay Wilder and former world champ Tyson Fury are all on Parker's hit list, but he knows the equation is not quite that simple.
I would love to rematch them and fight them again. I would love to fight Wilder or Tyson Fury right now, but I know that there's a sort of a structure in the division and how the rankings go, and I feel like now we have to sort of climb up to the top again. I think it'll take 2 to 3 fights or 3 to 4 fights before we can fight them again, but it's just about building and making the most of it.
Down for now, but far from out. Joseph Parker is determined his journey as a heavyweight boxer isn't over yet. Moti hotaka o tia hipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
3.5 minutes to 6. Lots of feedback coming in on Don Brash, and as usually the case when there's feedback on Don Brash, none of you are sparing the horses. Banning of Don Brash by Massey University is another example of left-wing intolerance of any views that differ from theirs. Next stop, socialist totalitarian state. Don Brash, that says one person, Don Brash should be applauded, not castigated, for his consistent adherence to the non-racist principle of one rule for all citizens. That's capitalised. Why are political parties so afraid as they paint God's own into an incomprehensible corner? So that's one side of the argument. That was from Barry. Thank you, Barry. The other side from Andrea. Free speech becomes hate speech when rooted in extreme beliefs that are now universally and globally unacceptable. Hobson's choice and right-wing activism offer manipulative, self-serving ideology aimed at ensuring that our systems and institutions remain culturally white and right-wing. Claims of white disadvantage and ethnic privilege will occur when ethnic people, people of colour and Indigenous minorities attempt to equitably share in a country's economy, government and decision-making agencies, or whenever non-white people want to right the wrongs of the past. So 3 pieces of feedback talking about the same thing. Don Brash's banning from Massey University, very, very, very different takes on it. Thank you. We really appreciate hearing from you. Text us 2101. Disney's new Winnie the Pooh film, Christopher Robin, has reportedly been banned in China. No specific reason for the decision has been given, but it's believed to be part of a nationwide clampdown on references to the beloved children's character who seems to be becoming a symbol of political resistance. This report from the BBC.
Pooh? Christopher Robin? No.
Winnie the Pooh, the happy, honey-loving, dim-witted bear, is not the likeliest figure to be banished to movie exile. But it seems the beloved children's character might be a bit too subversive for the Chinese authorities. They've been blocking references to Pooh on social media since images began to appear, comparing him to the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. A photo of President Xi in a motorcade, alongside an image of Winnie the Pooh in a toy car, was reported to be China's most censored photo of 2015. It's not clear why Chinese audiences won't get to see the film, but China, the world's second biggest film market, does have an annual foreign film quota, currently set at 34. It could be the authorities just weren't as keen on Christopher Robin as they were on Skyscraper or Mission Impossible Fallout, both Disney movies that did open in China. Either way, for now at least, Pooh, Tigger, Piglet and the rest of the gang from 100 Acre Wood will have to give China a miss.
I would have liked it to go on for a while longer. Perhaps it's our turn to save Christopher.
Well, I love Winnie the Pooh. I love it. Whose voice was that? Was that meant to be Winnie the Pooh's voice? That's not how he sounds.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, it was the original. It's the original Winnie
the
Pooh voice
okay,
from the 80s.
Oh, okay. I apologise.
I've been watching interviews with what's his name, who's playing Christopher Robin,
right,
on various programs, and I can't remember his name now. Obi-Wan Kenobi, you know. The Scottish guy. Whose name I've just forgotten. Stupidly.
That wasn't a very informative chat between us. Nonetheless, Winnie the Pooh fans, that's what we are, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Excellent. Let's listen to the pips.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten, aho. Don Brash says he still doesn't know why he's been banned from speaking at Massey University. The former National Party leader and Reserve Bank governor was due to speak to the Politics Society at the university in Palmerston North tomorrow. The Vice-Chancellor Jan Thomas cancelled the invitation, saying there were fears it could spark violence and the university has to safeguard students. Don Brash says the Vice-Chancellor claimed the decision was on security grounds, but hasn't explained what those were.
Most of her press statement is not about security issues, but about my alleged views, allegedly supporting the Canadian speakers who are here recently, and I don't support them at all. I support very strongly their right to speak.
The Prime Minister has criticised Massey University's decision to withdraw the speaking invitation to Don Brash, calling it an overreaction. And Jacinda Ardern says if one of her MPs shared a fake news website online, she would insist they take it down. The National MP, Judith Collins, posted an article on Twitter yesterday suggesting France was making it easier for pedophiles to escape rape charges, which is not true. The article is from yournewswire.com, which hosts a lot of fake news and conspiracy theories. Ms Collins has refused to delete the post or apologise. The Prime Minister says that's up to the National MP, but if one of her MPs was in the same situation, she'd insist they delete the tweet.
We need politicians to make sure that we maintain a standard, that we don't disseminate misinformation. I think it's really important that people can have some faith in the news and information that we share and that we talk about in the public domain.
Jacinda Ardern. The Cancer Society's medical director says the government's drug agency, PHARMAC, is failing to keep up with the latest cancer treatments. Oncologists throughout the country are calling on the government to fund more treatments, with many heading to Parliament tomorrow to discuss the issue with key health officials. The Cancer Society's Chris Jackson says New Zealand has a two-tier health system where some people wait years to get the drugs they need.
PHARMAC takes on average 3 years to review an application for a brand new cancer drug, and that means that Kiwis are missing out. And other countries like Australia and like the UK do manage to have a system that can facilitate a mix whereby they get good prices for their cheaper drugs, perhaps not as cheap as PHARMAC, but they can get access to these slightly newer, more expensive drugs.
Chris Jackson, the Cancer Society's medical director. PHARMAC says its applications are prioritised by several factors, including clinical advice, health benefits and available funding. A Wellington nurse says the pay deal agreed today will deliver her top priority of better staffing. Nurses and district health boards announced today that their employment agreement has now been settled after a year of talks and a national 24-hour strike. Mel Anderson, who works in paediatric care at Wellington Hospital, says it'll mean she no longer has to spend hours looking for a nurse to staff a shift. She says she's also hoping it means she won't be too busy in future to be able to spend 20 minutes talking to a family. An animal behaviour specialist says cows and members of the public should be separated during calving season. The man was injured on Sunday when he went to help a woman being attacked by cattle in South Auckland's Totara Park. Auckland Council identified a cow being overprotective of her calf yesterday morning and both were taken to the slaughterhouse. Animal behaviour specialist Elsa Flint says at other times of the year cows are well behaved.
They should just go into a safe zone, at least have a fence between them and the area that the people run or, frequent. Generally, most of the animals that live in these shared spaces are very used to people, and so at other times of year I wouldn't expect this sort of behaviour because they're used to all sorts of things going past them, around them.
Animal behaviour specialist Elsa Flint. 2 wildfires that have merged into one blaze in Northern California have swiftly become the largest fire in the state's recorded history. The so-called Mendocino complex is 11 days old and has burned 115,000 hectares, an area almost as big as Los Angeles. Thousands of people have fled their homes as the fire spread and 2 have died. New Zealand and Australian firefighters have been flown in to help local emergency staff. The authorities say it'll take at least another week to contain the fire. It's 6:04. Sport. The New Zealand boxer Joseph Parker says he has no immediate plans to step away from the sport. Despite losing his last 2 fights, the former heavyweight world champion has made millions of dollars and remains in good health. That has some people suggesting Parker should consider retiring, but he says he has unfinished business.
I have a goal and I know what I want to do in boxing, and I know that a lot of people have their opinions that I should give up and should stop and should do something else and retire, but we have decided to keep fighting because as a team we know what we can achieve and what we can do in the boxing world.
Joseph Parker. The All Blacks coach says they're well organised for next year's World Cup, but he's not thinking too much about that just yet. Steve Hansen says the aim for the upcoming Rugby Championship is to cement some combinations. He says a year out from the World Cup in Japan, they're on track.
Yeah, we're going okay. Don't get too excited yet, but we've done a lot of planning. We've done a lot of research, and that we've been to Japan once already. We're going to go there in November. We've done all the stuff that we need to do at this point. Now our focus has got to be on what's happening right in front of us, and that's the World Cup, so we'll put our attention there.
Steve Hansen. And the Chiefs playmaker Damien McKenzie has been named the Super Rugby Player of the Season. McKenzie beat out in-form Crusaders first 5 Richie Mo'unga for the honour, which was announced on the competition's official Twitter page. It says the decision was based on comprehensive statistics of every match this season. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples the latest from Chelsea Jade, among others. Historian Margaret McMillan continues the 2018 Reith Lecture Series on war. This week, attempts to legislate it, while our largely libertarian thinker Eric Crampton has been wondering about the wisdom of putting more local into government.
So the bigger one is 12 metres?
It's at least 12 metres long. I'd say it's probably more like 15 metres.
What sense do you get from that whale? I know that's a bit esoteric.
Oh, it's a very humbling experience. It's amazing to be in their presence, really.
That's Lately with Karen Hay, 10 p.m. weeknights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Peninsula and the Central High Country. Fine today, isolated showers developing tomorrow morning, then turning to widespread rain by evening with some heavy falls, possibly thundery in Taranaki and Waitomo. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, occasional rain, clearing Gisborne and Hawke's Bay by this evening, but returning tomorrow night. A few heavy falls in Bay of Plenty late tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, fine today. A few showers developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain in the evening. Northerly gales in exposed places tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Bulla through to Fiordland, scattered showers turning to widespread rain south of Bulla this afternoon and evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Some heavy and possibly thundery falls also. Northerlies rising to gale in exposed places. Canterbury to Southland, fine at first, patchy light rain developing late this afternoon or evening, and the Chatham Islands showers. It's exactly 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint. Ewan McGregor.
Yes, and
That's
Alan Bennett, another person.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the name. Sorry, I just had to get that out.
No, people have texted in Ewan McGregor.
With my finger. I'm sorry about that, John.
No, it's a point worth making. Thanks, KB. Yeah. The medical director of the Cancer Society of New Zealand has called the way some of his patients can afford better cancer drugs than others survival of the richest, and Dr. Chris Jackson says he sees variations of it every day that he treats people. His comments come as oncologists throughout the country call for more of the new cancer treatments to receive PHARMAC funding, and they come on the eve of a dinner at Parliament attended tomorrow night by the Minister of Health, key health officials, oncologists and Medicines New Zealand, which is effectively a form of industry lobby group. Now, one of the guests Medicine New Zealand has has brought to New Zealand is John Zelkberg, Professor of Cancer Research at Melbourne's Monash University and co-chair of Australia's National Oncology Alliance. Like Chris Jackson, John Zelkberg believes there's increasing evidence of a two-tier system in New Zealand. Drugs that are publicly funded elsewhere, in Australia for example, but not in New Zealand, that people wealthy enough to buy can still get anyway, and everyone else is missing out on.
If you take a drug like a disease like lung cancer, which is the commonest cause of cancer death in New Zealand, there are 5 modern new therapies that are available in Australia and the rest of the world that are not available in New Zealand.
One of them is Keytruda, right? And that is available for melanoma.
Correct.
But not for lung.
That class of drugs, correct. But let me take another group. This is a drug called crizotinib. Crizotinib works in a very rare subtype of lung cancer, something like 5%, so a very small population. It's available in over 50 countries around the world. There's probably 100 patients in New Zealand that would benefit. If they received it, the improvements in survival and progression-free survival, the improvements are 50%.
So that's a very high efficacy, isn't it?
It's a very powerful drug, and there are now better drugs on the market that have even replaced that.
How much does it cost, roughly?
I have no idea, but if I had to say, I would say in the range, somewhere between 50 and 100. I don't know, some number.
And this is the PHARMAC Balancing Act, isn't it? We want the most for the most with a finite amount of money.
Correct. So the drug's expensive, and I think the problem of drug costs is enormous, and the world is grappling with this, not just New Zealand, not just Australia. But much poorer countries than New Zealand afford this drug for their patients. If you or I had this type of lung cancer, we would not hesitate. This is the sell your house type drug. Why doesn't New Zealanders have it? It's available in Australia. It's available in Greece. Greece nearly went bankrupt last year, 2 years ago, whatever. The world was... Here's a country that's nearly bankrupt. Why did Greek citizens get this? Because it's an effective drug. The UK has got very rigorous criteria for access to drugs. Why does the UK have access to it? 50 countries around the world, it would probably add $1 million or, say, a year to the New Zealand drug budget. It's not available in New Zealand. That drug has already been replaced by a better alternative. And so you can't even get that drug, the new drug, on a clinical trial in New Zealand rather, because what the company says is you want to compare the new drug that's better than crizotinib, as it turns out, to crizotinib, the drug we're talking about. Well, we can't do the trial in New Zealand because we can't provide crizotinib anyway. The levels of missing out are going to get higher and higher, and the difference is greater and greater.
I was talking to Chris Jackson, who you all know as an oncologist, yes, and also the clinical director for the Cancer Society of New Zealand, medical director. And he says the issue in New Zealand is that they require clinical trials of 3 years. So all of these drugs are coming out and the efficacy is being proven fast, but PHARMAC's bar is much higher. The standards of persuasion are more rigorous and more long-term. Is that the issue?
Well, look, if you want to look at a new treatment, a new device, a new approach to anything, you can always create some uncertainty. You can always say, well, what's the long-term results? What's the long-term side effects? We treated 100 people in the trial. What will happen when we treat 1,000? You don't know until you treat 1,000. There's always going to be uncertainty. But there are levels of evidence that technology assessment allows you to work with. And as I say, for me, you can continue to say, I want the evidence. I'm worried about the cost. I'm worried about the patient. I think government has a responsibility to worry about the patient. And the patients are missing out. I just don't see why New Zealand, as a world-class developed country, is treating its community so poorly and not actually informing them about how bad outcomes are and how bad the access is. It's not just cancer. In diabetes, in some of the neurological diseases, in inflammatory bowel disease, in the rheumatoid diseases, the drugs aren't available. So New Zealand is entitled to do whatever it wants, of course, and to set its own standards, and it does so. But let's put the patient in the middle and say, where's our responsibility to the patient? Where's our responsibility to the frail and the sick and the elderly in our society? Or is our main focus going to be the money? is our main focus the war we're going to have with pharma. Prices are prohibitive. Fine. Fight with them. Fine. But patients can't be collateral damage here.
Where on the continuum do we draw the line? And it's a hell of a discussion to have, isn't it? If a drug costs $1 trillion and fixes one person, then clearly that's absurd. But that's a reductio ad absurdum, isn't it? That's a dumb example to use. So where between free and $1 trillion do we determine? And that seems like a really subjective criteria to me. And maybe New Zealand has less, well, New Zealand does have less money, fewer taxpayers than Australia. And vote health is under immense pressure. Just ask the nurses. So how do we know when the cost is too much?
Yeah, and I agree. In my very first involvement in this discussion in Australia, I was talking to a senior government person who said to me, "John, are you prepared to pay any price?" Which is the point you just raised. And I said, "Of course not. I'm not going to pay any price." So then his view was, well, what we're trying to do is figure out what the right price is. And absolutely government needs to negotiate, and government needs to try and find a way of bringing these prices down. But the point I made, John, is that poorer countries, unequivocally poorer countries, are able to afford this drug. And their budgets, I mean, Greece did not go bankrupt because it paid for crizotinib. I mean, nothing against Greece. All I'm saying is that there are poorer countries that manage to say that health is a priority. It's a right of citizens. And I think New Zealand probably spends a bit less on health than other developed countries. And that's a discussion to be had. There are processes underway to have these discussions. There's a health review, I understand, that's underway. There's a cancer strategy review that's underway. My understanding of those reviews, though, are that somehow I would call them have political boundaries. So PHARMAC, for example, is not part of the review. Why isn't it? If you want to review health and how much New Zealand spends on health, let's do it properly. Let us, New Zealand, actually say, let's put all the bits in. And then we'll have a discussion and we'll know how much more it will cost to provide a certain level of service. And we can decide if we want to spend that, and you may not. And that's perfectly reasonable, of course. Every country has to make its own decisions. But there are I think what's happened, and when I talk to colleagues and I talk to friends in New Zealand, it feels like that the process in which PHARMAC manages, and I'm sure there are very reasonable people in PHARMAC, but the process they manage has got sidetracked, and people believe somehow we've got the best system. There isn't. This is not the best system.
What are they saying to you, the people you're talking to, the oncologists?
The oncologists, it's. I said I might have had a glass of wine, but I said I feel like I'm still in my throat. It's so depressing to talk to people because they're so despondent. Despondent not just about access to drugs, that's one part of it. And remember, wealthy people get these drugs. We're not talking about the wealthy. Wealthy get them. So we're talking about the average person, the ordinary person in the street who doesn't get them. So they're despondent because they can't provide the right treatments. They can't train their fellows and their trainees. They can't train them properly because they can't train them in modern oncology. And now that example of the new drug replacing the crizotinib, they're behind already. They keep getting further and further behind. They're despondent because it takes so long to get a CT scan. They're despondent because of the waiting lists. People despondent about the fact that it's 3 months to get your stents done on a public waiting list. It's appropriate to review health, and that's what the new government is doing. And I'm not an expert, but certainly I would say that if they're reviewing health, take the political dimensions away, throw the medications as well as other parameters in, and do a proper review of health and make a decision about how you want to prioritise.
John Zelkberg, the Health Minister David Clark, says that since 2016, 6 new cancer medicines have been funded by PHARMAC, and the scope of use has also been widened. He says his government has invested more money in health in the last budget than the national government did in the past decade. He told us he disagrees with Dr Zelkberg, who represents the interests of Big Pharma. David Clark says, in a statement, PHARMAC told us it's assessing and progressing a large number of funding proposals at any one time. It says its priority is determined by a number of factors, including clinical advice, health benefits, the funding available, the success of negotiations with the suppliers and/or new clinical data. And the mix of other funding applications being considered at any one time. A lot of feedback always comes in. A lot of first-person stories from people who have gone private to get drugs that they weren't able to get through PHARMAC. We're going to call some of you. Thank you. But this from Mike. John, PHARMAC is the envy of Western democracies, excluding the US. It is a well-beater and it hails from little old NZ. If only a few more larger countries adopted the model, the worldwide drug company rip-off, in which the doctors are the key component, would be brought to heel and all drugs would be more affordable. Thank you for your feedback, whatever side it is coming from. It's 90 minutes past 6. Wellington's old trolleybuses, are making a comeback. They were taken off the roads late last year, but 50 of them will now be converted into battery-powered vehicles and will be ready as soon as January. It's all because of a $700,000 government grant announced today and comes just 3 weeks after the controversial rollout of the new diesel bus fleet. Our reporter Charlie Drever has more.
Many Wellington people were sad to see the iconic trolley buses go, and in some parts of the city you can still see trolley lines and poles. Now they're about to get a new lease of life. The government grant means NZ Bus can install charging stations at the Karori and Kilbirnie depots for 50 electronic vehicles. But Patrick Morgan from the lobby group Congestion Free Wellington says getting rid of the trolley buses in the first place never made sense.
Wellington retired 60 clean trolley buses late last year, and they were due to be replaced by a thing called a right-speed bus, but it turns out they never really worked. So unfortunately, Wellingtonians have been breathing toxic diesel emissions since late last year. That could have been avoided if the government had acted a little more quickly.
Herwin Bonges from another public transport lobby group is pleased with the announcement, saying the new diesel buses are a mistake.
We've got a dysfunctional networking system at the moment, and these old buses that are operating to an 18-year-old Euro standard, there seems to be the wrong types of influence around cost and not on the health of the public.
Regional Councillor Sue Kedgley agrees the buses need to go, and the announcement is at least a step in the right direction.
It made no sense for me to scrap them at all, but now at least we are converting those old trolley buses into electric battery buses, and we need to be moving towards an all-electric bus fleet and phasing out these diesel buses, because not only are they polluting and noisy, but diesel buses also emit emissions which are carcinogenic.
But Regional Council Chair Chris Laidlaw says replacing the entire diesel fleet will take years.
What we are going to see is that full battery electric buses are going to be filtering into the system. We've made provision for those. The first 10 are here already. There will be another 10 later in the year, early next year, and another 10 planned for a year or so after that. And I would say that within a decade, we will be most of the way to a full electric fleet.
Chris Laidlaw says the fate of the trolley buses was sealed years ago, so it's good they're being put to use. For Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
From Wellington to Christchurch, where the City Council is rushing to find another way to get chlorine out of the city's water to meet their self-imposed 12-month deadline. The council began chlorinating the water in March after it was discovered that some of the city's 156 wells were at contamination risk during flooding. At the time, the council promised chlorination would only last a year, but now council staff have found that bringing all of the wells up to best practice and removing the chlorine will be almost impossible within the existing time frame. Logan Church spoke to Water Supply Program Manager Helen Beaumont a short time ago.
What we've done is we've mapped out a program for the full remediation work, so that's bringing every one of our wells up to best practice, and we can't do that within the time frame. So now we're looking at what are the alternatives, and one would be to remediate some of those below ground wellheads so that they reach the standard today but don't quite reach best practice and the standard that we anticipate in the future. But one of the other things that we might be able to do is roll out more of the ultraviolet disinfection option, so that would replace chlorine at a number of pump stations. And ultraviolet disinfection we've had a look at, and it does work for our water source and for our water supply, and we may be able to use that at a number of pump stations.
Are you still confident that that 12-month deadline will be able to meet to get all of the chlorine, 100% of the chlorine out of the water?
I still can't answer that question, I'm afraid, but we are still working to that as a target. So we're having another look at that timeline and seeing what else can we do to meet that target.
I mean, that target does seem a bit further away, though, doesn't it? I mean, essentially, what I understand this report to be saying is that, you know, this is what the council staff wanted to do. We can't do it in the time frame. We need to come up with a plan B.
That's correct, yes. And it was always going to be a hard ask, that target, and we are going to have to look at more than one way of getting there.
Have the councillors and the mayor asked you to bite off more than you can chew, so to speak?
They've certainly set a very challenging target, but I think it's one that we can have a very good go at. So it's one that we're still looking at, and we still have options that we can pursue.
Logan Church speaking to Water Supply Program Manager Helen Beaumont. It's 24 minutes past 6. A diplomatic stoush between Saudi Arabia and Canada is intensifying, with Riyadh now suspending flights to and from the Canadian city of Toronto. Yesterday, Saudi Arabia froze new trade and investment with Canada after Ottawa urged it to free arrested women's rights activists. It also recalled its ambassador and gave the Canadian ambassador 24 hours to leave the city. Today, it ordered Saudi students studying at Canadian universities to leave. This report from the CBC.
The diplomatic spat was sparked by a tweet from Global Affairs Canada calling for the immediate release of several human rights activists, among them the women's rights campaigner Samar Badawi and her brother Raif. The message was retweeted in Arabic several hours later by Canada's embassy in Saudi Arabia. Raif Badawi's wife, Ensaf Haider, now lives in Quebec with their 3 children. She says she would love for Canada to keep putting pressure on Saudi Arabia to release Badawi. She says she's been fighting for his release and advocating for Canadian officials to do the same for 6 years. In a statement, Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs described Canada's call to release the Badawis and others as reprehensible and unacceptable, an attempt to interfere in the kingdom's internal affairs. Riyadh's response to freeze new trade and investment with Canada has come as a shock to many. Besma Mamani, a professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Waterloo, thinks it could take a toll on the education system.
I think one thing that we don't realize is that there's tens of thousands of Saudi students in Canada. It would be unfortunate if that stops or in some way they pull their students. They did the same in Qatar when they started a diplomatic spot there. They called a whole bunch of international students or their Saudi students to come home.
Last night, a spokesperson for Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland expressed serious concern at the situation, adding the department was seeking greater clarity from the Saudis.
The CBC's Dominic Valutis with that report. 6:26. Feedback on PHARMAC. Dear John, as a GP with 44 years' experience and having lost my husband to melanoma 14 years ago before any effective drugs were available, I feel I have a unique perspective. We do have limited funds with a small population, and PHARMAC does, in general, do a good job. I do feel, however, that we fully fund a lot of cheap, readily available drugs that are prescribed freely in large quantities to many people. Drugs like paracetamol, codeine and tramadol are handed out in huge quantities and often wasted. Money saved by restricting their use could be saved and would help to fund new, effective treatments for cancer and autoimmune disease. We need to rethink the way we fund commonly used and often unnecessary treatments. That from Nio Waters. Thank you, Dr. Waters. It's nice to hear from you. Just before we go tonight, authorities have arrested 2 men after 11 emaciated children were found living in filthy conditions at a compound in the US state of New Mexico. This report from Reuters.
11 children are in protective custody after being found living in filthy conditions at this compound in rural northern New Mexico last week. 2 men, Siraj Wahaj and Lucas Morton, are being held by authorities. Wahaj was wanted in Georgia for the alleged abduction of his 3-year-old son. Acting on a tip from Georgia authorities that the pair might be in Taos County, New Mexico, deputies raided the compound that was made up of a small trailer buried in the ground and surrounded by tires. The 3-year-old boy was not found there, but authorities found 11 other emaciated children living in what they describe as third-world conditions.
Their ages are 1 to 15 years old. All the children were taken into protective custody based on the fact that they had essentially no clothing, shoes, no water, no electricity, and no food.
3 women who authorities believe are the mothers were also on the property. One of them was pregnant. They were detained but later released into protective custody. The sheriff says the women would not cooperate with investigators. Authorities say Wahaj was armed with an AR-15 style rifle and 4 loaded pistols when he was arrested. He's being held without bond and is facing extradition back to Georgia. Morton faces charges of harboring a fugitive.
And so from Reuters, just before we go, don't agree with Brash, but he should be allowed to speak. We must learn to listen to every point of view despite our need to be right. Says one person, I'm a lefty, says Bruce, but I strongly believe Mr Brash should be able to speak at Massey, even if he spoke about Hobson's choice, which he probably won't. Bloody hell, morons. Attention, John Campbell Show. Massey University banning Don Brash from speaking. It's clearly wrong and a breach of free speech. In order to defeat his ideas, we need to organise the way the Auckland people organised against the Canadian pair of right-wingers. Don Brash, when he comes on Radio New Zealand, normally receives a lot of grief, but a lot of people supporting his right to talk at Massey. And Judith Collins, a pragmatic politician, says this person, if the post is good for Judith, she will be better. If the post were bad for Judith, she would take it down. As President Trump and Putin demonstrate, success is to appeal to your base. The truth is not important. It's what people want to believe that is important, says Paul. Thank you all for your feedback. We really appreciate hearing from you. On behalf of our excellent team, that is Checkpoint for this evening. Have a wonderful night and we hope to see you tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The former National Party leader Don Brash still doesn't know why his speech to the Politics Society at Massey University was cancelled. The Prime Minister says if one of her MPs shared a fake news website online, she'd insist they delete it. A Wellington nurse says the new pay deal means she won't have to spend hours on the phone trying to find nurses to staff wards. There's great rejoicing in Lombok today as rescuers pull a woman alive from the rubble of the massive earthquake that hit 2 days ago. Wellington's beloved trolleybuses are being brought back into service with a government $7,000 grant, but it takes years to fully electrify the bus fleet. One person is seriously injured after a logging truck crashed on State Highway 2 north of Gisborne. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Auckland power pop band The Beths